What single aerial machine could compel the world's most formidable air armada to concede their struggle was irrevocably lost? What single fighter aircraft possessed the capability to completely alter the trajectory of an entire global conflict simply by its mere presence over enemy territory? The answer resides within a pivotal moment that indelibly reshaped the course of the Second World War. It was the day German Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring gazed skyward above Berlin and beheld something he had deemed utterly inconceivable: American P-51 Mustangs, providing escort for bombers deep within the very heart of Nazi Germany. This narrative transcends a mere catalogue of aircraft specifications or a compilation of combat statistics. It is the chronicle of how one aerial combatant became the ultimate emblem of American industrial prowess, the tangible representation of Allied resolve, and ultimately the instrument that shattered the once invincible Luftwaffe. It recounts how German leadership transitioned from unwavering confidence to the stark, crushing realization that their dominion was disintegrating from above. The P-51 Mustang was far more than just a fighter. It was a transformative innovation that compelled Germany's most powerful military minds to utter pronouncements they never anticipated. The North American P-51 Mustang originated from a seemingly unattainable requirement presented in April of 1940. Great Britain, standing resolutely alone against the encroaching Nazi war machine, was in desperate need of fighter aircraft. As German forces advanced across Europe with unprecedented velocity, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation with a straightforward request: to manufacture additional Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license. However, James H. Dutch Kindleberger, North American's chief designer, put forth a daring counter-proposal that would forever alter the landscape of aviation. Rather than producing another company's outdated design, North American proposed the creation of an entirely novel fighter from the ground up. In a mere 102 days, a time frame that appeared impossibly ambitious, they unveiled the prototype NA-73X. Its maiden flight occurred on October 26, 1940, thus giving birth to the aircraft the British would christen the Mustang. Yet this early iteration of the Mustang was a far cry from the war-winning legend it would ultimately become. Propelled by the Allison V1710 engine, it performed admirably at lower altitudes but faltered above 15,000 feet, precisely the altitude range where bomber escorts needed to operate with maximum effectiveness. The evolution of the Mustang from a promising prototype to an unparalleled aerial warrior commenced with a single critical decision that would reverberate through history. British engineers, demonstrating their characteristic innovation under duress, resolved to experiment with their most prized possession, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. This was no ordinary power plant. It was the very same engine that had propelled Spitfires to victory during the Battle of Britain. This monumental decision, however, was born from a confluence of tragedy and ingenuity. British test pilot Ronald Harker had evaluated the early Allison-powered Mustang in April of 1942 and recognized its inherent potential at low and medium altitudes. Nevertheless, the aircraft's limitations above 15,000 feet were profoundly detrimental. The British, urgently seeking superior high-altitude performance, embarked upon a daring gamble that would fundamentally change aviation history. The synergistic fusion of American airframe design and British engine technology yielded something truly extraordinary. When the Packard-built Merlin engine was integrated into the Mustang in late 1942, the aircraft's performance underwent a dramatic metamorphosis. Suddenly, this sleek fighter could ascend to 20,000 feet in a mere 5.9 minutes, a stark contrast to the over 9 minutes required by its predecessor. Its maximum speed surged by 26%, and most crucially, it acquired the high-altitude capability that had been so desperately absent. The technical revolution was staggering. The new P-51B variant could reach altitudes exceeding 40,000 feet and maintain exceptional performance across its entire operational envelope. Its revolutionary laminar flow wing design, coupled with an innovative cooling system that actually generated forward thrust, rendered it aerodynamically superior to any aircraft then gracing European skies. The 1944 Truman Senate War Investigating Committee would later acclaim it as the most aerodynamically perfect pursuit aircraft in existence. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas J. Hitchcock, Jr., a veteran of the First World War and a celebrated polo champion who had developed a profound passion for aviation, championed this groundbreaking fighter with almost messianic zeal. Hitchcock had previously escaped German captivity by leaping from a moving train and trekking over 100 miles to safety in Switzerland during the First World War. His unwavering determination to ensure the Mustang's triumph would prove equally relentless, ultimately costing him his life. Hitchcock was not merely an advocate, he was a visionary who grasped that air superiority would be the decisive factor in the war's outcome. At 42 years of age, considered too old for combat by Army Air Force's standards, he leveraged his position as Assistant Military Air Attaché in London to champion the Merlin Mustang combination. His dispatches to Washington proved instrumental in securing the substantial production orders that would soon inundate European skies with P-51s. The industrial response was astonishing in its scope and speed. By the summer of 1943, Packard Merlin-powered P-51s were rolling off the assembly lines at North American's Inglewood, California plant and a new facility in Dallas, Texas. General Henry Hap Arnold had ordered 2,200 of these aircraft, deeming it one of the most astute decisions he ever made. But this was merely the beginning. Eventually, over 15,000 Mustangs would be manufactured, symbolizing the zenith of American industrial might. The early pilots who commanded these machines understood they were handling something truly exceptional. The P-51 seamlessly blended the pragmatic virtues of American engineering with the sophisticated intricacies of British aeronautical science. It was robust enough for mass production, sophisticated enough to outperform the finest German fighters, and durable enough to endure the punishing conditions of aerial combat over Europe. Training programs rapidly expanded to cultivate the pilots necessary for this revolutionary aircraft. American flight schools, already the most productive globally, intensified their operations to unprecedented levels. In stark contrast to Germany, which grappled with fuel shortages and curtailed training durations, American aviators arrived in Europe boasting hundreds of flight hours and comprehensive combat preparation. The United States Army Air Forces had discovered their long-range escort fighter, though they had yet to fully comprehend the extent to which it would revolutionize the war. The P-51 was not merely another fighter aircraft, it was a strategic weapon that would fundamentally rebalance the power dynamic in the European theater. The P-51 Mustang represented more than just advanced engineering. It embodied a profound shift in American military philosophy and industrial capacity. Where Germany had relied on technical sophistication in limited quantities, America opted for mass production of reliable, effective designs. The Mustang perfectly exemplified this ethos. A fighter that was excellent rather than experimental, dependable rather than revolutionary in its individual components, but revolutionary in its overall combat capability. The aircraft's range was its defining attribute. Equipped with external drop tanks, the P-51 could cover an operational radius exceeding 1,600 miles, sufficient to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. This capability struck at the very core of German strategic planning. The Luftwaffe had constructed its defensive strategy upon the assumption that Allied fighters lacked the range to penetrate deep into German airspace. Enemy bombers, it was presumed, would be vulnerable during the most critical phases of their missions when they were furthest from friendly fighter bases. The Mustang completely obliterated this assumption. For the initial time in the war, American bombers would have fighter escorts capable of remaining with them for their entire mission duration. This necessitated that German interceptors would have to fight their way through formations of American fighters before they could engage the bombers, and then fight their way back out. However, the Mustang's impact transcended mere range. Its potent combination of speed, maneuverability, and firepower rendered it superior to Germany's frontline fighters in the majority of combat scenarios. At altitudes above 20,000 feet, where bomber engagements typically occurred, the Mustang outperformed both the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. Perhaps most significantly, the Mustangs arrived in overwhelming numbers. While Germany struggled to replenish aircraft and train pilots, American factories were churning out hundreds of P-51s monthly, and American training programs were graduating pilots at a rate faster than the Germans could shoot them down. The Mustang's introduction into combat operations marked the commencement of a meticulously orchestrated campaign that would irrevocably alter the balance of air power over Europe. The 354th Fighter Group became the inaugural operational P-51 unit in the European theater in late 1943. Initially assigned to the tactical 9th Air Force, they were swiftly reassigned to escort duties with the strategic 8th Air Force. The pilots undertaking these initial missions understood they were forging history. Captain Don Gentile, who would ascend to become one of the war's most celebrated aces, described the sensation of piloting a P-51 deep into German territory as akin to possessing a magic carpet capable of outrunning and outfighting any opposition the Germans could muster. The psychological effect on American air crews was immediate and profound. For the first time, bomber crews were assured of fighter protection throughout their entire mission. Their inaugural long-range escort mission occurred on December 13, 1943, safeguarding bombers targeting U-boat pens at Kiel, a round trip of 980 miles that established a new benchmark for escort range. The mission was an unmitigated success, with no bombers lost and several German fighters destroyed. Yet this was merely the genesis of what would evolve into a systematic campaign to dismantle German air power. The tactical innovation that enabled this was as consequential as the aircraft itself. External drop tanks mounted beneath the wings nearly doubled the P-51's operational range to over 1,600 miles. These tanks could be jettisoned upon commencement of combat, allowing the Mustang to engage unencumbered while still having reached targets deep within German territory. The engineering was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. By early 1944, General James Doolittle, the new commander of the 8th Air Force, implemented a revolutionary alteration in fighter tactics designed to maximize the Mustang's potential. Doolittle, the same commander who had led the audacious raid on Tokyo in 1942, understood that a purely defensive posture would never secure victory. His new directive was straightforward yet transformative: hunt down and annihilate German fighters wherever they could be located. Previously, escort fighters had been mandated to remain in close proximity to bomber formations, engaging enemy aircraft only when directly threatened and swiftly returning to the protective formation. This defensive mindset had curtailed the effectiveness of even highly capable fighters such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning. Doolittle dramatically revised these orders. P-51 pilots were now authorized to pursue and eliminate German fighters, irrespective of their location, even if it entailed temporarily deviating from bomber formations. The hunter had become the hunted. The 4th Fighter Group, stationed at Debden and commanded by the legendary Colonel Donald Blakesley, received their P-51s on February 28, 1944. These were not novice pilots. They were seasoned veterans who had already distinguished themselves in Spitfires and P-47s. Within days, they were operational, with some pilots taking flight after receiving less than an hour of familiarization with the new aircraft. 4 days later, on March 4, 1944, the mission that sent seismic shockwaves through the Nazi hierarchy occurred. The 4th Fighter Group escorted B-17s and B-24s to Berlin, marking the first instance of single-engine fighters completing the 1,100-mile round trip to the Nazi capital. The formation was immense. over 800 bombers protected by more than 900 fighters, with P-51 Mustangs providing cover during the most perilous segment of the mission. The psychological impact of this sortie cannot be overstated. For the initial time, American fighters appeared over the Nazi capital in broad daylight, engaging German interceptors in the skies above Hitler's seat of power. German radar operators, observing formations of bombers that had previously operated without fighter escort, suddenly acquiring aerial protection deep within German territory, were initially incredulous. The follow-up mission on March 6th confirmed this was no anomaly. American P-51s not only escorted bombers to Berlin once more, but engaged in fierce aerial combat over the city, downing 17 German aircraft without the loss of a single Mustang. This was not merely a tactical triumph. It represented a strategic revolution that fundamentally altered the balance of power in European skies. This mission sent reverberations through German leadership. The appearance of American fighters over Berlin signaled that no target within Germany was beyond the reach of sustained daylight bombing. More significantly, it meant the Luftwaffe would be compelled to contest control of their own skies, a battle for which they were increasingly ill-equipped against America's burgeoning industrial and technological superiority. The German reaction to the P-51's presence over Berlin underscores the profound psychological impact of technological and industrial warfare on a nation that had prided itself on invincibility. Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarshal who had once boastfully declared that no enemy bomber would ever reach Berlin, was forced to confront a reality that shattered his fundamental assumptions regarding German air supremacy. The moment of reckoning arrived on that fateful March day in 1944, when Göring witnessed what he had pronounced impossible: American single-engine fighters operating above the Nazi capital. According to numerous sources and eyewitness accounts, Göring's reaction was immediate and devastatingly honest. Upon witnessing Mustangs over Berlin for the first time, he reportedly declared, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." This was not merely an admission of tactical defeat. It was a recognition that Germany's entire strategic posture had become untenable. Göring's reaction, however, signified more than personal failure. It mirrored the disintegration of German strategic assumptions that had guided their war planning since 1939. The Nazi leadership had constructed their entire defensive strategy on the premise that Allied fighters could not penetrate deeply into German territory. This presumption had influenced everything from aircraft production priorities to the siting of critical industries. The appearance of P-51s over Berlin did not simply present a tactical challenge. It meant that every major German objective was now vulnerable to persistent daylight assault. Adolf Galland, Germany's general of fighters and one of their highest-scoring aces, with 104 confirmed victories, experienced this new reality firsthand and grasped its implications more acutely than most. In the spring of 1944, while flying a Focke-Wulf 190, Galland encountered a formation of B-17s escorted by P-51s over Magdeburg. This was not an ordinary combat engagement. It was the moment when Germany's most experienced fighter commander confronted the very weapon that would decimate his air force. When Galland attempted to attack the bombers, 4 Mustangs immediately engaged him. Despite his exceptional skill, extensive experience, and piloting one of Germany's premier aircraft, Galland was compelled to resort to desperate tactics to effect his escape. He fired his guns forward, expelling smoke and spent shell casings to create the illusion that he was under attack from behind. The ruse succeeded and Galland evaded capture, but the psychological impact was profound. If Germany's most seasoned pilot, flying their finest aircraft, was reduced to employing stratagems for survival against American fighters, what hope did ordinary Luftwaffe pilots possess? This encounter perfectly illustrated the transformed reality of aerial combat over Germany. Even the Luftwaffe's most veteran pilots, commanding their most advanced aircraft, were now fighting for their very survival rather than for victory when confronting American adversaries. The predator had become the prey, and every member of the German Air Force understood the implications for the war's outcome. The advent of long-range American fighters precipitated what military strategists term a cascading failure within German air defenses. Unable to await the return of fighters from escort duties, bomber interceptors now encountered fresh, alert enemy fighters at every stage of engagement. German pilots, already grappling with fuel shortages and reduced training periods due to resource constraints, found themselves consistently outnumbered and outmatched by American pilots who had undergone extensive training and possessed ample fuel for prolonged combat. German technical analyses of captured P-51s revealed the astonishing extent of American industrial capability and the hopelessness of Germany's predicament. Luftwaffe engineers who meticulously examined downed Mustangs, calculated fuel capacities, measured engine performance, and analyzed construction techniques. Their conclusions were grim. This was not a fortunate accident or a temporary expediency. The Americans had conceived, manufactured, and deployed in vast numbers an aircraft specifically engineered to dominate European skies, and they were producing them at a pace far exceeding Germany's ability to destroy them. The psychological warfare dimension was equally critical. Every P-51 that appeared over German territory carried an undeniable message. American industrial might could reach any location at any time, and German resistance was not merely challenged, but ultimately futile. This realization spread like a contagion through German military leadership, eroding confidence and diminishing the will to continue a conflict increasingly perceived as unwinnable. By March of 1944, the impossible had become inevitable. American bombers, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, were penetrating deep into German airspace with an efficacy that German leadership had deemed unattainable. The strategic bombing campaign, which had faltered in 1943 due to unsustainable losses, was now systematically dismantling German industrial capacity with surgical precision. The statistics tell a stark and brutal story. In October of 1943, prior to the widespread deployment of the P-51, 9.1% of 8th Air Force bomber sorties reaching their targets failed to return, with an additional 45.6% sustaining damage. By February of 1944, with Mustangs providing escort, these figures plummeted to 3.5% and 29.9%, respectively. For the first time in the war, Germany was subjected to relentless round-the-clock bombardment. British bombers operated by night, American bombers by day, all under the protection of fighters capable of reaching anywhere within the Reich. The Mustang's impact extended far beyond mere statistics. During the week-long Big Week offensive in February of 1944, P-51 pilots accounted for 17% of the Luftwaffe's experienced fighter pilots lost in air-to-air combat. These were not simply numbers on a scoreboard. They represented irreplaceable veterans whose training and experience could not be readily replicated. General Adolf Galland would later reflect on this period with his characteristic candor, stating that the Luftwaffe's failures against Allied air forces were directly attributable to the success of the American Air Forces in fielding a long-range escort fighter aircraft, which enabled the bombers to penetrate deep into Reich territory while still receiving constant and robust fighter cover. Without this escort capability, he admitted, the air offensive would never have achieved its objectives. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, air supremacy over Western Europe was so absolute that only 2 German aircraft responded to the massive Allied invasion. The Luftwaffe, which had instilled terror across Europe in 1940, had been systematically vanquished by a campaign made possible by the P-51 Mustang. The aircraft that began as a British emergency request had evolved into America's Sword of Damocles, suspended precariously over Nazi Germany. The arrival of every P-51 in the heavens over Europe conveyed a clear indication. America's manufacturing prowess knew no bounds, capable of projecting force wherever and whenever it chose. This meant German opposition was not merely tested, but destined for ultimate failure. In retrospect, Hermann Göring's pronouncements held a prescient truth. The presence of these Mustangs above Berlin signified far more than a military setback. It heralded the commencement of the Third Reich's demise. That long-range fighter, a concept once deemed unachievable, had transformed into the very tool that would orchestrate Germany's downfall from the air. The P-51 Mustang achieved more than just triumphs in aerial engagements. It secured dominion over the European airspace, thereby paving the way for the Allied forces' ultimate triumph. When the German command observed American warplanes soaring above their own capital, they were not merely observing aircraft. They were witnessing the potent fusion of democratic resolve, industrial might, and cutting-edge technology, all converging in a devastatingly effective synergy. The game was unequivocally over, a reality fully grasped by all.